So it was a very, very dark place. But the organisation and those of us who were involved in it with passion to keep the community alive and to keep people ticking over until the inception of the DDDA, which it just brought us all to life. And that continues despite cutbacks in funding, but the passion keeps us going. And we will continue to fight whatever comes our way and ensure that the needs of communities are recognised and addressed financially. I mean, the problem with the SDZ is there is no mention of any funding being available for community needs. And I think it was Ms. Keane said, well, you need to find other ways of funding. Well, we need to find that, and that's one of the things we feel very strongly about, is funding available, because other than that, it's aspirational.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry, Laura.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that there are real concerns about, about the whole economic and fiscal planning of the SDZ, as Betty has said, that will, supersede and overpower the wider Docklands area, and that's a big worry for us, because I mean, where the SDZs has been passed, I mean, the economic growth will happen, but we're fearful that the infrastructure, the social infrastructure and the social needs will be lost. And like Betty said, in St Andrews, I mean, at present, the projects, I mean, we've lost so much in funding over the last couple of years that, I mean, and now we're going to be expected to, supply more services maybe than because of the downturn. And I mean, there's no way of us being funded through anything that we have seen in the heads of bill. I mean, there's nothing that has jumped out at any of us that's going to tell us that we're going to be happy with what's happening there.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thanks to Deputy Catherine Murphy, whose place I'm taking on this committee today, just to say that. As somebody who was born and lives in the Docklands, I'd be very aware of relationships there, and I do think it has to be acknowledged that there were very, very fractious relationships between communities and the DDDA over the years, and it hasn't all been resolved satisfactorily for some of those communities. So there's still a lot of work to be done on that particular aspect. I think the south side learned from the north side. I think the north side were the pioneers, and the north side had all of the difficulties. They did all the learning, I think, for the whole Docklands area, and I think the south side did benefit from the mistakes and the difficulties and the problems on the north side. But I think the whole area of community, the community voice, the community work, and particularly the voluntary effort has to be very much acknowledged today. When I heard developer-led, that's when the alarm bells go off. And there's no doubt about that. And I was disappointed in what we're hearing now with the SDZ, that we're back to that. And we're not learning the lessons from the past. And the lessons that were hard won by the communities. And we're going back to that now. Developer-led, developer-driven, profit margins are the gods, and the communities get lost in that. And there's a real fear, I think, that that can happen. Now, listening, I think the main issues are the loss of policies from the master plan and the amount of work that went into the master plan, and now it can just be gone almost in a flash. There's the whole issues of the community gain and housing, the legacy issues there. They're still major issues, and the trust, as was brought out very, very, very succinctly and very clearly. So I suppose I'd have to come to a question/conclusion. I mean, how well were communities listened to in this process, this consultation process, and the conferences, the workshops that took place? So I think through this committee, is for those issues now to go forward with a very strong voice from this committee in the Dáil, so that the issues that you didn't, I would think, didn't get a proper hearing on and a proper addressing of and a resolution of, that we could see a very progressive bill going through. But I don't think it is that progressive because of the criticisms that you brought out here today. So I think it's vital that this committee is a strong voice for those outstanding issues.
Tony.
Tony MacDonald, thanks, Chair. If I could just make the point in with regards to the, we're not making the emphasis here as to why the community reps should go forward and stay the way we were, having an input and not being told what, as I said, we're going to be told what our medicine should be. You should be in there part and parcel of the decision making, which is reflected in our submission. And indeed, Chair, you mentioned that the housing, etc., was a lot better on the south side than the north side. But to cut to the chase and make an argument as to why there should be continued community involvement, reps, particularly at decision-making level, is if you look at one part, we've all accepted by and large, I think, that the good parts of the Docklands is absolutely excellent, etc. But for argument's sake, the North Lots area, which never had before direct representation, you only have to look at the track record of there where there was no direct local reps, and the dereliction that was there. As I do say to many persons, there isn't a child swing in the area, or there wasn't a brick laid for the community. So if that was to continue, that we're just going to be told by the Dublin City Council that, you know, probably meet 4 times a year, and here's what we're going to do for you. A classic example, Chair, just to finish up, is the North Lots. You don't want to be going to that again. The areas have to have direct involvement, direct decision making to say, here's what's wrong, here's what the people want, don't tell us.
Can I come in just on that point? Yeah, because, and it is an issue that we're, but the bill itself and the regeneration bill and the one that we're going through, and actually number 2 of that bill and the aims and objectives, and it is a standalone piece of legislation to ensure continued local community and business development in the Docklands regeneration through the Docklands Consultative Forum. Now, that's there, as does, but it is what we have to ensure is that the Consultative Forum and the membership of the forum is, you know, the representation, and it comes, and obviously we can't lose all of the history we have and the intelligence that has been created over the years. So it's there, it's written down. It's one of the main aims and objective of the bill to ensure continued local community and business sector involvement in the Docklands regeneration. So if we follow that aim, and it is an aim and objective of the bill and the government, I want to put that on the record because of what Maureen said there, you know, oh, it's sad that it's going to be developer-led. Dublin City Council and every council in Ireland have changed from the bad old days, and I sat on South Dublin County Council for 20 years, and development plans nowadays are different, and I can go back as far as 1991-92 when they weren't developer-led, but with the consultation and the ground up, and that's why I'm saying it's important to have the community at ground up. Hope I do, and this is what this is about, and this is what we're here for, to ensure that that does happen.
Yeah, so.
I just want to raise one point Maureen said about the what we have achieved over the years in the Docklands. We had a set of policies that were written in the master plan that went back to 1997 and was reviewed every 5 years. This was our Bible. This is how we knew and this is how we engaged. Reviews took place every 5 years, and everything that was done within that, both from the planning and the community development point of view. So we had guidelines to go on. It is our remit from the Department of Environment that we review the master plan every 5 years. We're now back on the Docklands for over 2 years, and we haven't been given the facilities to review that master plan. Therefore, we're going into another plan without being able to review the past. You cannot move forward unless you look at what has been achieved and decide whether you want to bring it on or leave it. As it is, we are going to go into what is in the City Development Plan, whether it is a subsection or not. And the City Development Plan deals with planning. It doesn't deal with community development. They have community development sections. But what we had was a holistic approach to everything within the Docklands, where we were trying to, instead of having a them and us, because people who can afford to buy in the Docklands and investors can afford to buy the apartments, and those that can pay the high rents can do it. But we have pockets of the indigenous community there that have never had a traditional education beyond 12 or 13-year-old. And we're trying to work with all those people. There are communities and bring them along, and that will all be gone. it'll be thrown out, and we will end up with these pockets again of depravity, the wealth. And in order to look at what we've achieved and see where we can bring it forward, we must review the master plan and use that as our base point.
Maureen, okay.
I do think one of the sad things, and we all acknowledge the positive, is the extent of gated communities in the Docklands area. And we see the massive number of those kind of communities now, as opposed to the traditional communities. And I do think we have to keep an eye on that we can have space for families and for the traditional type of housing, and it's not all high-rise, which is what the Docklands would love to have 20 stories all over the Docklands area.
It's Shani.
If we could just respond to what Senator Keane was saying, I think one of the interesting things from our point of view is that we were all appointed by the Minister for the Environment on the basis of a nomination list that was drawn up at the initiation of the Act, which had 70-odd organisations listed on it. That's now been scrapped. The new list will be drawn up by Dublin City Council, and even when people are nominated, who will be picked will be decided by Dublin City Council. That's not the same kind of a process whatsoever.
I think there, Shani, is when you mentioned Dublin City Council, who are you actually directly referring to? Are you directly referring to the executive or to the elected councillors?
No, I'm directing to what's in the consultative forum.
It will be the councillors that will actually do the nominations.
Yeah.
And we have
The elected councillors.
Well, that's fine, but that also has implications.
Yeah.
And we don't know how that list is going to be drawn up of nominating organisations.
I would imagine, just for clarification, and maybe we can get it further clarified in the bill, the list would be drawn up by the elected councillors rather than the executive. Because when we had Mr. Keegan in here, the Dublin City manager, I think he may have had the view that it would be himself, but it's been since clarified it'll be actually the elected councillors.
Well, that changes the thing, but not all that much.
It would draw up the nominating bodies, or would nominate the members on
The nominating, I would imagine both the nominating bodies and the nominations would then go into for the councillors from those nominating bodies.
And why wouldn't the community send in their nominations?
They will be.
Put themselves forward, and then let the councillors decide or consider. Yeah.
I mean,
Excuse me,
what
Chair.
Johnny, sorry.
So in the Senate, so we just don't want to, please don't infer any discourtesy on our behalf on that, okay? So apologies on that, okay? Thanks very much. So apologies.
Thanks.
Thank you. If you don't mind, I'm just going to ask a couple of questions, Maureen, myself, and maybe Robert, just one from yourself. Is certainly within your submission is about temporary usage of land for urban gardening or greenery. But temporary, how, in your mind, because something is given temporary is always very difficult to get back.
Not necessarily.
Do you have a procedure that you're thinking of that works?
Well, there is a Conacre agreement that is is specific to Ireland, and basically it's been used successfully by Dublin City Council and other local authorities. It basically gives access to a site for 11 months, and then the site has to be vacated by all of the gardeners for a month. And that hiatus basically means that there isn't continuous occupation of the site. So it protects the landowner, usually the local authority, usually Dublin City Council, from any claims of ownership from a third party that's been making interim use of that site. So from a legal point of view, there's a lease framework that you can use. It's called a Conacre agreement. There's always going to be a motion on the use of a site. If it's used as a community garden and is of great value and provides a community resource for 5 years, for 10 years, when the owner of that site wants to develop it, there is going to be some emotion about that. But that's not an excuse for us to be, in a situation where we're locked out of our own house, because we can't do anything with the vacant sites in Dublin for fear of planning blight. And for the last 10 years, it's been like that. There's these vacant sites that no one is allowed to touch. Some of them are in NAMA administration, some of them aren't. but there's a wish to develop them further down the line, and therefore nothing's happening for 10 years, maybe for 20 years, maybe for longer. It's an absurd situation. There's always going to be arguments for doing nothing, but I think, that's not really a responsible way forward.
Could just the community representative, the wind up of the Dublin Docklands Authority, there would be an element of a possible surplus of money after the wind up. Could I just ask your views on how that surplus should be used?
It should go into the Docklands Community Trust. That's the obvious place to put it. We already have the structure in place. The way the trust operates is that we don't spend any of the capital, and that was the model that we saw in London in the Royal Docks Trust. So we only spend the interest or the income. Up to now, we've only had the money launched, and we're operating on the interest. But because interest rates are so low now, we've had to make a decision to invest. But obviously, the bigger the capital we have, the more we can earn, and we will only spend what can be earned on it. So the capital will never be touched. So in my view, one of the obvious places to put it, because the brief of the community trust is very broad. Education is the main area of interest, but the memo and articles of association are very clear that it's a charity designed for charitable purposes in all sorts of areas, and it's left to the board to determine what way to spend the money.
And just within kind of the remit, the Docklands was a social regeneration, which was groundbreaking at the time, because before it was the physical regeneration rather than just the community, the social regeneration. We're dealing with the surplus. Now, I would imagine when you would be making the argument for that surplus is that the pension contributions currently with the DDA should be transferred to the department to increase the surplus that would be available. Would the community be in agreement with that?
Well, I'm not quite sure. The point about the pensions liability.
But it's a great liability if you look over from previous evidence that we're given here at the committee, is that the pension liabilities don't fall for about 10 years, but they are a financial liability. So if that liability was taken out of the surplus, there would be less money for investment into this. There would be less money there from the surplus from the winding up the DDA. So what I'm just saying is, have you looked at in detail at those figures and would have recommendations on how those figures will be broken down?
No, certainly the trust haven't, and it hasn't come up in conversation. Obviously, the trust contains a number of solicitors and people with.
I would be looking at it separately from the trust. I'm talking about within the committee and working with the Docklands Authority. Those conversations about of creating a pot of money that could be invested in social regeneration. Has that taken place at the committee? Maybe it's better for France.
No, we haven't discussed it at all. In fact, that would be a matter for the board of the Docklands and not the council.
Yeah, I think it might be an interesting discussion to have with the DDA from the community's point of view.
Well, I think the only time anything was mentioned about what monies was over was when they'd say there may be some monies left over, but the discussion never went any further, in the sense of they say we have to wait until we, finish up and see what's left. There's never been any discussion about what would happen with it. We always lived in hope that it would go into the trust, because initially, when we formed the trust, that was something that we looked for it to happen, was that when Docklands would, just grow out of its own time, that the monies that would be left would go into trust. So we've always felt that's where it should be.
Yeah, but it's trying to generate as maximum pot of money as possibly there. I think it would be important that the community representatives on the Docklands Authority would have that discussion with the DDA before it dissolves, because if long-term pension liabilities are taken into consideration, it reduces the possible surplus I'm suggesting a course of action for the community rather than...
Thanks, Chair.
Chair, if I could just... Yeah, it's never been our kind of forte, the pensions. It was never discussed in any shape or form. The very first word of pension is yourself here today. So at our level, at the Dublin Docklands, it's never... But I would just... My own thoughts on it would be that Dublin City Council went into taking over the Dublin Docklands, and all that was envisaged with their eyes wide open. So I'd imagine they've to accommodate the pensions in some shape or form, but it's never been discussed.
I might have given direction, so
But that's what
probably
we're
not my
looking
rod.
for.
Just in relation, is if you look at it, is and like I'm coming again, and I think what communities need to be about building a pot of money, because within the SDZ, which is not up for discussion at this meeting, it's site-specific. The levies are site-specific, So again, I think probably the communities, the Dublin City Council and the department will have to look at the broader prospects of getting a pot of money. And like there's some major developers plus NAMA relationship is there has been conversation between the community and those groups in adding to that pot of money for social regeneration. Yeah. Just within the whole sector of the 20% local employment clauses, and we've had that to minor success, and I think quite minor success is expanded. I'm coming from the Docklands like Maureen and living in the Docklands all my life. I always had a kind of question of whether there was an emphasis, not necessarily from the community representatives, but from the community itself, on trying to get the building jobs, the construction elements, which are all short-term jobs, and we've had some successes through the business forum in the Docklands Authority. But I'm just wondering, is in looking at the legislation, should there be a greater emphasis on the 20% of local employment in the new businesses, and that's where you tie the education and the employment clauses into the long-term employment?
Yeah, just to say, what made the 20% social housing strategy comparatively successful was the fact that it was tied directly to the planning permission. And it seems to me, after having experienced it and studied it over the past few years, the only hope we ever we ever really had of getting the 20% local labour was if it was tied to the planning permission. Because what we found very early in the operation was that builders were able to bid cheaper to developers on the basis, and come in with lower tenders on the basis that under the Lisbon Treaty they could employ people in Lithuania or Turkey or anywhere else, bring them in here to work at the wage rates that were operative in Lithuania or Turkey, which made them come in with lower bids, but it was very difficult for us to negotiate the 20% local labour with them. That was only at the building phase. The other phase of it, and the end-use jobs, is more important. And certainly, even if you take the jobs that don't take high levels of education, like security and cleaning and all those kind of jobs, very, very few of those are going to local people these days. They're not advertised through the local employment services, and it's hard to see, although I know that somebody in the paper connected with the American Chamber of Commerce mentioned the point that for every 10 jobs created in the IT sector, 7 jobs, subsidiary jobs are created locally. That might very well be true, Chairman, but they're not going to our people. That's very obvious.
Sorry, just out the Laura's going to come back to Tony.
You mentioned about maybe something could be done through the education thing. I mean, in Docklands we had the schools placement programme, which was a very good programme that, moved, people, young people leaving school, after leaving cert, going into, the high-tech jobs like the banks or either the financial services or whatever. And they built, and most of them stayed and, went on to, they were only supposed for a year, but majority of them continued on to full-time jobs. And that's one way of, like creating to get some of our people into the newer companies. And there is a lot of young people in our area that are in the financial service now due to that programme. So that's an area that we should be looking at as well.
Sorry, Tony?
Yeah, the Lord is just, that last point is what I was going to make. One of the points is that there's been great activity in the financial services and indeed the third level education from the community trust. But one of the points that you made, you alluded to, was that, construction can be short term. But when there are apprenticeships, they may be short term on the site in question, but then they learn their trade and they're ready for the world thereafter for the rest of their days in the construction. So if the 20% was to be tied, as Shani says, to planning permission, contracts, whatever the case may be, yes, it may be a short term for the apprentices parts of it, but at least they learn their trade and they go off and they're accommodated for the rest of their life.
Josephine?
Just in relation to, I think, alluding back to both the planning and the master plan, and I think expectations and a clear set of policies in relation to firms coming in. I think one of the things that we have found when, I suppose, the Docklands fell and everything happened was that firms continued to say that they were providing community gain. The community gain that they generally meant was a Christmas party or something like that. I think without a very clear structure, and for the firms coming in, and whether they're small local businesses or whether they're multinationals coming in, they need to know what are the policies, what are the expectations of when you come into this area. If you look internationally around the world, you are generally handed a handbook saying, welcome to Australia, Sydney, Docklands, or wherever, and go, these are the levies, these are the plans, this is what you have to do. It is not a Christmas party for the local old people. And I think this is one thing, this came out during the planning hearings, very, very clearly, whereby, and it's in the planner's report, where the planner, and I think on board Planal obviously don't publish their own commentary on each decision, but I think from the planner's report it was quite clear where they said those issues were ultra vires to the Planning Act. Only those things written in the Planning Act can they comment upon in the STZs. And there will be plural STZs. So unless there is a very, very clear structure, all of those issues that we are talking about will fall between stools.
Just cleared up, and some of these things were dealt with at other hearings. I just wanted to just get the views of the community in relation to it. There's some legacy issues within this, and I'm just wondering, would you like the element of the bill? There's a very complicated clawback on affordable housing within the Docklands Authority, especially within the later schemes. Would it be the community's view that you would like to see that addressed in this?
Yes. Yes, because I think it's where the idea of it at the start was, was a very good idea, because we wanted, like Shani said earlier on about social housing, that we wanted to keep the people who were buying affordable housing within the Docklands area. Do you know what I mean? We didn't want people to be going off and, making big profits on it, but as the downturn came, that wasn't going to happen. There's people left in very serious situations at the moment. Some, like families that broke up, or some, of debt, needs to be debt forgiveness on them. So we do really need, it's an issue that we really need to look at and to get some kind of closure on it as to where we should be going, and some leadership on it, because we've been bringing this up time after time. Every time we've had a council meeting, I bring it back up and bring it back up. There is no solutions been given to us, except that it's legal. So I don't know how rather legislation can help us with that or whatever, but we do need to address it.
Yeah, just running through this in no particular order. In relation to the housing trust, and I'm not too sure the number of units in the housing trust, but a lot of things is size and sustainability. Would the housing trust be of adequate size for it to be sustainable, taken into the MUT bill, sinking funds, etc., etc. So sometimes you need, a certain amount of numbers to make a housing trust sustainable. And I'm just wondering, is the housing trust large enough to be sustainable, to carry the costs?
Well, at the moment, the Housing Trust has 72 properties. They're Shelbourne, Wharf, Hanover, the management company, there's a management company initially appointed by the City Council, with whom we're very happy to work. We have a good relationship with them. We're happy with the level of service that they're giving the people. So we're very happy to leave the situation as is. We don't have any great ambition, Chairman, to be the owners of huge amounts of property, but we do want to protect those as many of those properties as we can for accessibility from the City Councils